So this is part two of a two-part video on relationships and interactions in a text. And I got cut off at the very last minute, but I just wanted to pick up right where I left off, which was growth in a union membership. So I just read that trade union membership jumped. And I was discussing that the reason it probably jumped is because, think about it, in a time where people didn't have very much, they were going through the Great Depression, there wasn't any money, resources, or jobs. If you did have a job and there was a group of people out there willing to fight for your safety at work and better pay, people probably wanted to jump on board with this and make sure that they were part of something bigger than themselves. So to me, that's what I gained from reading that sentence, that trade union membership jumped. It was almost 9 million by 1940. More members brought new problems, though. So I'm about to read, okay, so this sounds so great, but obviously there were some problems that came along with it as well. In 1935, 8 unions within the AFL teamed up. Now, just to remind you, the AFL is a group of unions. So a bunch of unions formed in different locations, joined together, and that's how they created the AFL. So in 1935, 8 unions within the AFL teamed up. They created the Committee for Industrial Organization, or CIO. They wanted to organize skilled and unskilled workers together. Okay, so when I read that, when I think about skilled and unskilled, so I'm going to go ahead and circle skilled, circle unskilled. When I think of skilled, I think about the previous page where I read people that worked in steel work or carpentry, people that had a talent or a skill. But then I'm also reading unskilled as well. So I'm thinking maybe people that didn't have those crafts or trades. I'm thinking maybe that's what they're talking about. And so what I see in this paragraph is all of a sudden some of these unions in different locations wanted to represent all workers instead of just the skilled craft and tradesmen. The AFL had opposed efforts to unionize unskilled workers. They wanted workers to stay organized by job function. Okay. So this is where, this is going back to what I just said about the craftsmen, the tradesmen, the steel workers were grouped up by job function. The carpenters were grouped up by their job description. And that's how they unionized. Okay. So let me keep reading. The CIO's effort worked, though. Many plant workers joined together in unions. In 1938, the AFL forced out the unions that had formed the CIO. The CIO quickly established its own group of unions. The official name changed to Congress of Industrial Organizations. It would compete with the AFL. Okay, so basically what I hear is that the unions separated. We had a group of unions that said we should represent skilled and unskilled workers, and we had a group of unions that said we're only representing skilled workers, as I mentioned before. So now the union is split. Soon the United States entered World War II. There it is again, World War II. We had talked about that in the beginning of the text. Labor leaders promised not to get in the way of the U.S. military's factory production. Specifically, they would not go on strike. The government also put controls on pay for workers. This slowed pay increases for workers. However, workers won big improvements in other areas. They were especially helped in the area of health insurance. Union membership soared. Okay, so even though America is at war, the government said, okay, unions, listen, I can't have you guys getting in the way of what we're trying to do here. So we're trying to have people keep their jobs, but we also need people to go to war. We can't help you with wages because we need money to fight this war. So why don't we help you in the area of health insurance or benefits? So that's why membership soared, because people knew that they would still be getting help from their union. Okay, guys, so that's it. That's the text. Notice, hopefully you picked out something that stuck with you on how I dissected this text, but we need to go back now to our focus for reading, which is focusing on relationships and interactions. So here's this slide again about the questions we needed to consider when we were reading. Which people, events, or ideas does the author treat as important? How would I explain their relationship to someone? What supporting details support my explanation? How do people, events, or ideas connect together? Okay, so I'm going to go through and try quickly to answer each of these questions one by one. And as I'm answering them, please look at how I answered it, because this is how you are going to be expected to answer the assignment in EDSB next. Okay, so which people, events, or ideas does the author treat as important? Remember in the beginning of the presentation in part 1, I said that it kind of goes hand in hand with this other question. How do people, events, or ideas connect together? So this is how I answered each of these questions. So which people does the author treat as important? Here was my response to that. I typed in, the author discusses people that were important, like labor unions, which are groups of workers, employers or bosses of a business, union organizations like the AFL and CIO, and the government like President Roosevelt, Congress, and the courts. So those are the people in the text that the author treats as important. The events that were important, this was my response. The author discusses events that were important, like the formation of unions to help workers, government actions that helped workers, conflict between the unions that divided union members, and the Great Depression that caused many people to lose their jobs. So those were the events that were talked about over and over again that were important. And then, of course, the ideas that were important in this text. The author discusses ideas that were important, like President Roosevelt creating laws that made it illegal to hold workers back from forming a union, workers forming unions to protect themselves from unfair working conditions, and how out of the Great Depression, a time when Americans had no money and resources, grew the formation of unions. So guys, this is what was most important in the text. This is what the author kept explaining to us over and over again. And if you noticed, some of what I listed under people also got listed under events and also got listed under ideas. The reason I did that is because they're all connected. The people, the relationship the people had were all connected. Okay, so for example, like the labor unions or the group of workers had a business relationship with their bosses or their employers. And the employers had a relationship with the union organizations because they were, the unions held the employers accountable to make sure that their people were paid good. The events were related, the formation of unions, the government actions, all of those tied together to create this flow of events, and the same for ideas. So do you see how I answered my questions? I did that here in complete sentences, which is what I expect from my 5th grade students. Students should not be putting 1 or 2 word answers down. The way I answered the question here is the way your answers should look when you type them into EDSB. Okay, so moving on to the next question we consider. How would I explain their relationship to someone? I'm not going to read through all of this for you. You can pause the video and read this on your own time. Again, this is a great way for you to learn how to answer the questions in EDSB. This is what I expect from you. And this also explains kind of what I explained on the last slide. But again, you can pause it and read that yourself. What supporting details support my explanation? Guys, all I did here was pretty much copy evidence that proves the way I answered my questions. Unions bargain with employers on behalf of employees. They push for good wages. They also fight for safe working conditions. Okay, so again, just talking about that relationship between the employees that are joining unions and the employers. This piece of evidence right here shows how there is a relationship between those two people that were discussed in the text. Okay, and we're at the end of our video, relationships and interactions in a text. So if you're not sure or you don't understand, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to go through this with you slide by slide. I'm also happy to do the assignment with you if you need help. If you need to, watch my video again. I go through and I explain details of how I found relationships and how the people and the ideas and concepts interacted in the text.